Hey guys, welcome back after half term. Hope you had a lovely time. So today we are going to go through labeling the functions of the eye with the parts and that quality diagram we drew before half term. For me it's about page 162 of our notes booklet. So have a look, and it's just a big giant table essentially. So if you have a look at the picture of the eye here, the first part that we're going to look at is a thing called your conjunctiva. So it is this little colorless layer that's in the very front of your cornea. So it is a very thin membrane, and its job is to protect the sclera. And if you've ever had conjunctivitis, or pink eye, this is where you've been infected. That little membrane gets infected and makes your eyes look pink in the front. The sclera then is the first of the three layers of the eye. It's this outer layer up here that you can see, and we can see some of it when we look in the mirror. Its job is that it's going to hold your eye in shape. Once upon a time we used to be able to do eye dissections. We're not allowed to do it now, and you'd have to cut through the sclera, and it's quite tough to get through. So it's the white outer layer that you see when you look in your mirror, and it's very tough and opaque, and that it doesn't let light through. So there are functions of the sclera. So the next thing that we are going to look at, and it might not quite be in the same order in your book, is the choroid. Oh, no, it is in the order of your book. So we're going to look at the cornea. So your cornea is now the transparent part of your sclera at the very front of your eye. And obviously the whole point of that is that it's going to let light into your eye. So this is kind of what it is up here, whereas this is really its function. So highlight that for yourself. It lets light into the eye. You could put both pieces together if you wished in an answer, but its job is to let light in. So the next layer then is the choroid. So we have the sclera on the outside, and you have the choroid is this middle layer. And this is essentially a dark colored layer. And what it does is it ensures a thing called internal reflection can't happen. So what does that mean? So light will travel into your eye, and ideally you want your lens to focus it at this point here, this thing called the fovea at the back. But if light hits it and light is capable of being reflected, then the light would literally bounce all over the place. Every time it hit something, it would bounce, and it would drive your brain mad. But having this choroid layer being dark, it means that internal reflection can't happen. The light won't bounce inside your eye, so it doesn't drive you mad, and you're able to see an image and process what that image is. So the choroid has a real important function, so no internal reflection can happen. So the next thing we have is the retina, and in our diagram up here, the retina is this blue layer. So it's the very inside layer of your eye, and it's really, really important because it is where all of your light receptors are. So these are called rods and cones, and essentially the light is going to hit them, and it will process the light as an image when it sends it to your brain. Now there's a pigment in the rods, it's called rhodopsin, and rods and cones have different jobs. So you have a little table here to help you. So in my head, cones begins with C, color also begins with C, so cones do color. So in terms of the rods, there is roughly 120 million of them in your eye. They detect, I have to bring this down again. They detect in black and white, so they work in dim light. If you wake up in the middle of the night, your eyes will try to use as much of light as that's available, and it's your rods that are doing all the work. So if you are lacking in this pigment rhodopsin, you will have issues with your night vision. They work, obviously, we've just said, in dim light for you, and they are all over your retina to give you the best vision that you could possibly get in the dark. The cones, on the other hand, there is a lot less of them. They are detecting in color, so the RGB stands for red, green, blue. That's the colors that they detect. Obviously it works in bright light, so daylight, as opposed to waking up in the middle of the night. And you have the majority of your cones are very near your fovea, so we will come on to this. So that's that little nick we put in our diagram of when we drew our retina. We put a small little nick into it. So the retina is where you do all of your vision, for want of a way to explain it. So your fovea then has all cones are in there, and it's where you have your best vision. So you will want to focus, anything that you look at wants to ideally focus onto your fovea. So if your lens isn't working correctly, you could be focusing the light short, or you could be focusing the light too long, and depending on that, you will be long or short-sighted, and you will have your glasses will work in such a way that it will then definitely make sure that light will hit the fovea. So your blind spot then is where all of the nerve fibers leave your eye. So this is your blind spot here. This is where all the nerve fibers leaves. There's no rods or cones at this part of your retina. Essentially, you have no vision there. It doesn't matter what you hit on it in terms of light. It's not going to do anything with that information, because there's nothing there for it to be able to process the information. And at your blind spot, you have, coming out the back of your eye, literally like in the diagram, your optic nerve. So we're going to move on eventually to our nervous system, but for now, just to know that there's these things called axons in here, and you will learn about them in the future. But your optic nerve will carry the impulse from the rods and cones to your brain, and it is white and stringy if you ever get to see it. As I say, we're not allowed to do eye dissections anymore because they are very good. And just, I love stupid pieces of information. Your optic nerve is like the size of the ballpoint pen refill, so the Bic part that holds the ink. So it's quite chunky monkey. So the next we have is your lens, and your lens is obviously going to change the shape, and when it does that, it's going to want to focus the light on the fovea that's back here. So depending on where you move your hand, it is your lens that is changing shape to bring it into focus for you. Obviously the lens, it is very elastic because it's going to have to change shape, and it's transparent because it's going to let the light through. So attached to that then we have what's called your ciliary muscle, and your ciliary muscle will change the shape of the lens, and this is called, an optician is called accommodation. So if the accommodation of the eye, if it's not doing its job and hitting the fovea, it's an issue with your ciliary muscles. So, and obviously it surrounds your lens, and it's going to pull the lens and help it to change shape. So it'll either make the lens skinnier, or it will actually make the lens fatter, depending on what it wants to do and what it wants to focus on. And the suspensory ligaments just connect the lens and the ciliary muscle together and hold it all and make it work. So we then have the iris, and the iris is the coloured part of your eye, and it controls the amount of light that enters your eye. So obviously, you know, if you close your eyes in front of your mirror and squeeze them, and then open them, you will see the iris will change shape. So it will control the amount of light that is going to hit your retina. So moving on then, we have the pupil, and unfortunately this would be the demo of looking in the mirror, but this won't work on a Mac. But in terms of the pupil then, the pupil is literally the hole that remains when the iris changes shape. So it lets light in, and if it's dim light, your iris, the pupil will be huge, and if it's really bright light, your pupil will be really small. And then the last little bit of this is that we have two humors, they're called. So we have aqueous humors, that's in the front of your eye, and we have vitreous humor, which is in the back of your eye. So aqueous humor is just holding the front of the eye in a particular shape, and the vitreous humor is behind your lens, and it's more viscous, and again, it is going to hold your eye in shape. So they're all the different functions and parts of the eye, and there's an awful lot of detail in there, but you just look at it in terms of knowing the function. So some of the pieces of information are FYIs, but in terms of you have it in the context of the function. A question that the SEC love to ask is, why do we have two eyes? And essentially it is to do with depth perception. It allows us to see in 3 dimensions, and it gives us binocular vision. So if you've ever had one eye, you could be, trying to grab at something because your depth perception is off. Okay. Now, this is going to be on our class notebook page for homework, so you'll be able to figure out hopefully what should go in each number. We are going to very quickly just go on to hearing and just do a little bit of the functions, the 3 parts and our diagram, and then we will leave it here until Friday. So functions of the ear, obviously goes without saying one of them is hearing, but it actually has a second function, and that is in balance. There are 3 sections to the ear. We have the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. So sometimes if you have ear infections, your GP will, say, oh, you have a middle ear infection. Your outer ear and your middle ear are filled with air, so they're subject to the atmospheric conditions. And your inner ear is filled with fluid, and this fluid is called lymph. So if you're okay with this, we are going to do our diagram drawing of our ear. So we go. Okay, so I noticed in the recording that the ear wasn't drawn quite correctly for you to be able to see everything, so you should be able to see everything now. So when we start with our ear, we start with what we consider to be our ear on the outside. So the design of this is such that it is going to allow sound to travel in. So those funny folds that are on your ear, they're actually there for a purpose. It allows sound to travel down. So we have your 3 parts to your ear. So your actual ear itself is called your pinna. This little channel that it travels down is called your auditory canal. The rule is if your elbow, if it's bigger than your elbow, you shouldn't put it into your ear. And obviously you can't get your elbow in your ear, so don't put anything in your ear is the moral of that story. So here we have your eardrum, so you can usually stick your finger in there and it'll stop, and that's you hitting your eardrum. So we are then going to draw our 3 little bones, and I'm kind of going to draw them a funny way, in that they are going to kind of match their shape of things that we have in real life. So we have, no, I'll leave it in blue. Come back to this. So once we hit down here, I'm going to draw something that kind of looks like a snail shell down here, and up here then we are going to draw 3 what are called semicircular canals, like so. And in yellow we are going to put our nerves coming out here. So the white out here is going to be our outer ear. In the blue it is going to be the middle ear, and the green over here is your inner ear. So we have to do the naming of our bones. So all 3 bones here together are called the isosceles, and individually the first bone after the eardrum is the hammer. We then have an anvil, and we finally have a stirrup. And these are the 3 smallest bones in your body. The tube here, it connects to your throat. It is called a eustachian tube. And when you pop your ears, it's your eustachian tube that helps you to do it. So if you grab your nose now and breathe out, you will feel your eardrums get bigger. And if you swallow, it'll disappear. And that helps you to equalize pressure. in your ears, which is really important because you don't want them to burst. So these guys up here are called your semicircular canals, and these are involved in balance. And down here, the thing that looks like a kind of snail shell is called your cochlea, and this is involved in hearing. So we have two sets of nerves. So the nerves that are attached to your semicircular are called your vestibular nerves, and the nerves that are attached to your cochlea are called your cochlear nerves. And they're obviously going to your brain and taking the sound with them. I think we have put in everything. So that is how to draw and label an ear.